So this is a little extra video I'm just making to show you just how painful it is to boot Monkey Island 2 and play it on a Amiga. This is an Amiga with one floppy drive, this is an Amiga with 1 MB of RAM. It's what everyone would have had at the time, but Monkey Island 2 on 11 discs is uniquely horrible to actually play on an Amiga, which is why I recommend you don't these days. So we started the video as I rebooted the Amiga. We just got through the intro for the people who cracked it, and I don't know why we've done that because they haven't. I actually have the code wheel here ready because when it gets the copyright in about an hour and a half's time, it is going to insist I get this right. So I have, having found it online, this wonderful thing, and we'll try and figure out exactly how to do it. We're going to have to wait a while since though, so at this point if you'd like to hum quietly to yourself. I'm not going to pretend this is the most exciting video that this channel is ever going to spawn. So here is Mankind's copy protection. And just to prove that someone didn't do their, for want of a better word, job, we'll insert random numbers in here. Yes, this is as quick as they appear. And so that doesn't work. So quite what the people who cracked the game think they were doing, I don't know. So let's see what we've got here. We need some sort of weird beetle bug thing. I drag that round on the code wheel. And peg leg polish. This does not feel like a sensible spell at all. I drag it. So you line up the symbols on the wheel. If I drag it vaguely into the right place, you can see what I've done. And then whatever it asks us to make, in this case gout, which doesn't feel like a thing I want to make, we just read off, and it's 56 and 16. So we type those in, wait for the computer to realize we typed those in, and that should be correct. I'll mention this in the full episode, but there's Monkey Island 2 and Monkey Island Lite. For this purpose, doesn't matter what we'll choose. So our first disk swap. Make sure you keep a note at home. And it wants not disk 2, but for some reason disk 3. So just off your screen, Amiga Forever at least gives me a menu for this, but you'd have had to physically remove and insert the disk. Thankfully the Amiga, unlike PCs at the time, disk 10, unlike PCs at the time, can tell when you've inserted and ejected disks. So I find disk 10, which for some reason isn't in the right order, but let's not worry too much about that. It sees I've got disk 10. So why we needed disk 3 for literally half a second's worth of loading there, I have no idea. It's also not terribly pretty that it's managed to draw the interface and then just leave it sat there while we wait for the loading. But we have at least now reached the start of the intro for the actual game. Although, as you can hear, it's immediately loading to load a lane coming down. Why it didn't do that before the start of the animation, I'm not sure, but I suspect this is one of those things that comes from the PC being the lead dev platform. We're seeing how long it takes to get in and play, so we'll skip that, but I don't know why it forces you to watch that when, for all you know, you're about to restore a save game. That's another disk swap, that's what, the third. Back to disk 1, so we've gone 1, 3, 10, 1 so far. So it looks like that intro story animation was on disc 3 and 10 for reasons. It's already starting to feel like I started loading this back in 1992 when this game came out. Ooh, a sign of life. This is also skippable, although when you do it, I dump the sound like it is, but never mind. It's the pausing to load bits of animation that's really frustrating. But we can also skip that intro. That transition's much cuter on a PC too. Again, we can skip this, but notice you still haven't had the chance to load a save game, as far as I can tell. Back to disc 3. Didn't you enjoy it enough when we saw it the first time? We're deliberately using an A500 with one drive here, like you would have had at the time, but Monkey Island is at least smart enough to support 3 external drives, which means you can actually get through all of this without disk swapping, although as soon as you enter a new area it'll ask for the 5th disk, and then you're pretty much as bad off. So suddenly we're back to disk 1. I mean, it does seem that everything so far could just have been on disc 1, or at least disc 1 and 2, because none of this stuff it's ever going to need again in the game. It's not like it's putting it in any sort of order. And then maybe you could do something like what Formula 1 Grand Prix did, and then in future goes you could just stick in disc 2 to load the game, and you could skip all the intro guff. Because I think the first time you can load a game is after this little sequence. And finally we see the fabled disc 2. I think I noted this is our 6th disk swap across 4 separate disks, so if you had 3 external drives you're already at the point where it's done something with each of them. It doesn't take a lot less time as well, of course, with 3 extra drives, because the slow bit is this disk access, which is going at something like 20k a second, I think. And so the best part of 8 minutes, if my recording is accurate, we finally get to a bit of meaningful activity. So let's go on and play this a little bit longer. When you roll across here, if you don't know Monkey Island, you're ambushed by the game's first antagonist, and it's supposed to be a surprise ambush. That sort of fails on this version of the game for this reason. Oh, what's going to happen now? I hope it's not some sort of ambush. Holy hell, it's an ambush! The differences between the Amiga and PC versions are that the PC version has 256 colours and this is surviving on 32, and also that this only has music some of the time. There is actually a soundtrack for most of the game, but you only hear it on the PC. I guess because even on 11 discs there just wasn't the room for it. I have a feeling the PC version is about twice the size, and that's all going to go in music and the higher colour graphics. Incidentally, the choices you make dialogue-wise of this make absolutely no difference other than Largo says something slightly different. The whole thing is designed to reset you like at the beginning of most games, so he runs off with your cash. So a little free tip if you're actually playing this for the first time, because it's one of the easier things to miss right at the start of the game. Look at that sign. I don't know what it says no doing, but whatever it is, that spade stuck to it is something we're going to need when it's finished loading the interface back. I don't know what the sign said. Well, I don't see how that relates to a spade, but if you pick up the sign or use the sign, then you end up, once it's loaded the bitmap, and this is the problem with the Amiga version, everything is just 5 seconds of disk access and it just breaks your flow. At the time, I guess it had been something you'd have lived with on the Amiga, but if you're playing it in 2019, do yourself a favour and get ScumVM or the remastered version and not have to sit through this stuff. So if you know what you're doing with this game and you've played it 1,000 times before, as at this point I probably have, the first thing you need to do is go and get the quest to get the voodoo doll of Largo the Grand, which is how you're ultimately going to escape the island. Disc 3. And a friend from the first game, the voodoo lady, will give you that. And she lives in the swamp across the map. And this will represent the first time at which, if you had those 4 external drives, like some kind of enormous Rockefeller, that you would actually have to do a disk swap. And you'd have to be quite careful which one you swapped, because if you did the wrong one, you'll only be swapping again just as much as those of us with one drive. Because if you take out the one we're going to need on the way back, my guess at this point is probably this is going to last for 4, I think. Yep. I think it's probably safe to take disk 1 out at this point if you're on external drives, because I think we've exhausted that just getting this far. Although if it's using the whole of disk 1 in memory... Oh, I put in 3. That I used to do with the real Amiga as well, and that's really frustrating. It's not quite a record for the number of floppy disks something came on. Beneath the Steel Sky was on a couple more, I think, on the Amiga, and hopefully we won't have to play it on that for this series. But I do remember getting a copy of Office on something like 35 disks, but at least with Office you installed it and then never touched those disks again. And, you know, if you were happy in life, never touched Office again. I think we can possibly get as far as the Voodoo Lady without another disk swap at least. So we'll just get that far to demonstrate the point. For an Amiga game, it is pretty, despite the reduction in colours, although you can see where they probably haven't redrawn it and they've literally just taken the 256 colour one and dithered it. But really, I just wanted to show you this to show you just how frustrating this would have been to play on an Amiga back in the day. The momentum of the game is constantly sapped by those 5 seconds pauses of disk access. And why a hard drive is so much the nicer way to play this. So look out for the episode of the project which this is part of. You'll see it on my channel at some point. I don't want to say too much until, well, I've named it as much as anything else. And we'll find out what the relevance of watching an idiot attempt to load Monkey Island on the Amiga is. In the meantime, ta-ra!